fact. You always make mistakes one after another. That's life, unless you're an enlightened being, I suppose. But you can only ever do your best. And I feel that if you're not helping people to be, what's the word, not obsessed with these things, for want of a better term, then you're doing them an injustice as a teacher anyway, because their life is going to spiral into somewhere it's not supposed to be.
And in regards to Qigong and practicing Qigong, uh, does the, where does the subject of uh, maybe like becoming aware of spiritual entities,
Oh, right.
is that
Yeah.
like a thing?
It is very much a thing. It's very much a thing. Yeah. I mean, with regards to almost all of the Chinese arts, I mean, same as Hindu, right? Same as the yogic arts, there was a great discussion of non-human or non-physical entities, and they had different names for them. In fact, Chinese as a whole grimoire of it, if you like, is like a Dungeons and Dragons monster text at different times, but they name all the different types of ghosts and entities and immortals and all kinds of things. But again, these days they've often been stripped out because Qigong went down a very medical route. Um, but yeah, they're very much a part of it. But I think again, there's something that should arise naturally rather than being something somebody should pursue. So I've had my own experience with such entities, but most people in my school probably would now have no idea. Not because I'm secretive about it, but because I don't view it as a major part of it. So unless I'm directly asked, it's not something I would talk about. I would tend to focus more on the mechanics of what we're supposed to be doing. But those entities arise and become more apparent the more that your awareness absorbs into the subtle realm. Yes. Yeah, for sure. And some are
And
negative, some are positive.
yeah, and what you said there was, I think, really key, is that your awareness can, begins to open up to subtle realms.
Yeah. Yeah.
And can you just give us an example of one of those experiences as an example?
Yeah, no problem. I'm happy to talk about it. I mean, I've had several actually, which for a very like I'm a natural spade as a spade kind of guy, and I wasn't naturally sensitive or naturally inclined to being interested in such things anyway. Um, so in some ways was quite interesting that was forced upon me in many ways. But certainly there's stages in alchemy and meditation where, okay, so I'll give you an example. There was a stage in alchemy I hit, I guess it's alchemy, energy work, where there is a white light that starts to hover um, initially just outside of your sort of, like 5 meters, 6 meters outside of the edge of your physical form. And it starts to hover there like a ball of light. And then this would happen for some time. And then what happens after a while is that ball of light comes down and hits you, like you're being hit by lightning. And when it starts to come down and strike your body, it's funny that those are the biggest advancements in your practice. Like that's when something converts, or that's when something changes in your mind or a perception or something like that. But I always put it down to during that phase just something I was personally seeing. I didn't think anyone else was seeing it. I assumed, because you see things in meditation. I assumed that when there was other people in the room, nobody would be aware of it. But then I was in a restaurant in Switzerland, weirdly, in the Alps, and I was eating in a very crowded restaurant, and one of these white lights suddenly appeared in the ceiling above me, and then shot down and struck me in the room. And everybody in the restaurant started screaming and sort of heading for the doors because they thought something was going wrong, electricity was exploding or something. And then twice when I was teaching, the same light came in, hovered above the room, and then struck me as well. All of the students seeing it, like a room full of 40 or 50 people. And those kind of things faded after a while. It's like often these things come in phases and then they disappear. Then maybe 5 years later it comes back again, then it disappears. And again, if you're, I don't want to say apathetic, it just sounds like I'm a miserable bastard, doesn't it? But that indifference to it that I've always naturally had, it's like, oh, that's a thing, whatever, means that you don't pursue it and then it starts to sort of return when it's supposed to. And then gradually I've come to realize that those white lights are actually sentient, or they have a degree of sentience, and there is a lesson that is learnt from them. And there's even a weirdly, it's almost like a oral, like you hear their voice or something. And I don't know why or how within your head, that is giving you instructions when these things go off. And those are only, you know, that's just one experience I can talk about. But I can only talk about it in very vague terms because my indifference has meant that I've never really made any effort to study whether these are written about or what other people have seen in other traditions because I don't know. I don't know why. Why am I not? Why? I should question is why am I not interested in that? I don't know. That's peculiar. I should be, shouldn't I? But these are
Yeah.
definite sort of tangible things that arise through the practice for sure. And I would put those down to being non-corporeal beings, I would say.
Right. And in within the text, is there like a name for those type of beings, other, in traditional Chinese or Taoist language?
I don't know within the text, but my teacher has said that they're a version of Ling, which is like a, how do you describe that? Like a spirit that is cultivated to a high level, not necessarily our own. So I guess he's talking about spirits.
Yeah.
He would talk about, yeah.
And I mean, in your experience with that, those seemed like positive or negative type experiences?
Oh, positive for sure. And I definitely think there's an aspect where human beings, I think that only from my own experience, that to the spirit world, if you like, of which my main rule is you don't trust spirits. I think as a general rule, um, I don't think they're a bad idea. But I think in the spirit world, most of the human world is like dark. And then some people, for some reason, maybe they manage to turn on a part of their energy system, or maybe they're born that way, are lit up in that realm and perceivable by them. And some people do practices, astral projection or something that makes you temporarily lit up to such beings, and then you attract their attention. But I definitely think that human beings have I don't think we come into this world alone. I think there is a host of things that are attached to our soul and attached to our spirit. And the closer that you get towards these sides of the practice, they start to communicate with you and have a higher degree of connection with you. Or that's my experience anyway. But I'm sure that there's people that have explored such phenomena would have much better technical terms. So I'm sorry for my vagueness of
No,
explaining it.
I appreciate it. It's very genuine, and I like hearing it through that perspective. And I had mentioned before that I was going to bring up the UFO issue.
Sure,
So
yeah.
is that a different set of experiences?
Yeah, yeah. I remember being a kid actually, and I grew up in the countryside, Somerset in the UK, where I grew up. I don't know if people know where that is, but it's very rural. I grew up with sort of cow farms and barn dances and stuff like that. It's not quite Alabama, but it's sort of getting that way in America, that kind of area, you know. Lots of people in my village were definitely married to their own cousins, so it was a very rural place. And so lots of cornfields around, and I was quite close to some of where the crop circles were made. So I was always very interested in those particular things, and they're very fascinating. If you ever seen one, I did get to see one once. They're all like woven together. It's quite amazing. You
Yeah,
can't, and I'd never read about this. I just sort of saw the shapes and wanted to see, and I saw the weaving of the corn, and it definitely they weren't like cut down by people trampling them or anything like that. Super amazing. And then later I went to read about them afterwards. But we would always get like lights that hovered in the sky down in the area where I grew up. It became quite normal to the point that I remember a couple of times as a kid, maybe 13, 14 years old, something like that. Sort of my parents calling me out in the garden, and there's like a white sphere hovering above the garden, shining a light down. And they became so normal that we were like, all right, come in, have a look, and then keep your parents happy, then go back in to carry on watching The Simpsons or whatever. They were quite normal. Maybe that's where the apathy started. I don't, I don't know,
yeah.
towards these kind of things. And then I saw them again in China as well. I remember being on Wudang Mountain, which is a very famous mountain range. Sorry, do you want these stories or
Yes,
I,
please,
I don't
please.
know.
Yeah,
I don't know how much this is what you wanted, but I went to Wudang Mountain and I never studied the martial arts on Wudang Mountain because, and no offense to Wudang Mountain practitioners, I found them kind of basic, to be perfectly honest. It's a very they're good entry level stuff, but there's nothing I would consider particularly deep there. So I went to this mountain range that used to be a cultivator's mountain range in China, and I ended up just living there. I didn't study anything. I just sort of rented a place and lived on the mountain and did my own practice, right? And oftentimes at night, there was one particular peak that you would see lights come up above the tree line. It's like pine forest, yeah? They would come up above the tree line and then suddenly shoot like what must be quarter of a mile within half a second or something, and then boop, like dip down between underneath the tree lines again. And I was there with students and friends of mine that would come and we would just watch these lights moving around. And when you ask the Chinese teachers, they would say, "Oh, we're mortals, cultivators," but like, who knows? I got no idea. But I think the lines blur, don't they, between all of these things? But definitely a lot of those phenomena were not normal phenomena. These days, people might say drones, but drones didn't even exist at that stage. I mean,
Yeah.
they
And
were
what did the teachers call it?
immortals. They would say
Okay.
immortal spirits, cultivated spirits moving around.
Yeah. It's a very interesting aspect to it. And, one of the reasons I bring this up is because, I've had a number of UFO experiences. And
Yes.
for whatever reason, when I was practicing even like basic Qigong and yoga and other stuff, uh, it seemed to augment that activity,
Yes.
you know, of seeing and interacting with such things. So I always had found it a fascinating kind of correlation between these kind of subtle energy practices or awakening practices and that kind of phenomena.
Yeah, for sure. I think the more that your mind goes into that state where it's perceiving the subtle, either on a basic level or an advanced level, then yeah, your bandwidth of your perception will open up. I'm sure we've all seen that diagram where they show like how much of the visual spectrum human beings could see, and we're basically blind, aren't we? It's quite amazing. Uh,
Yeah,
what
we see
we can
like
see
less
compared to
than
what's there.
1% of the physical, of the universe. That's
It's
that's
ridiculous. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. No one can ever say they have good eyesight. I mean, that shouldn't even be
yeah.
something. How good's your eyesight? It's all shit. It's all less than 1%, as you say. So I think the more you go into that realm, the more you see. And definitely the more chi that you build, the more that your mind interfaces with it. If you do the mental work, then yeah, that perception becomes a lot higher. I mean, there's a phenomena within Qigong where you start to be able to see the actual fields of magnetism around people when they're practicing and when you're practicing. And I think I would imagine it's just a deepening of that experience until you can perceive deeper and deeper and deeper.
Yeah, into subtle realities. I guess when you begin to practice with it, you start to become more aware of those realities.
Yes. Yeah, for sure.